everybody, and welcome back to my channel. Thank you for joining me for the second video of the Harloween season, and I'm going to start this video with a question. What would you do if your child went missing and you had no idea where she was for weeks? But then, out of the blue, you found her in another city far away. You were so grateful to have her back that you didn't spend much time considering how she'd gotten to this place and why, although she looked the same, she seemed different to you. She seemed to not even know who you were. This and more happened to the Picard family in 1922. Francois and Marianne Picard, along with their 9 children, lived on an isolated mountain farm in Saint-Rival, a coastal region in Brittany, France. In 1922, only about 500 people inhabited this area, so it's clear to see how truly rural and out of the way the Picard's farm would have been, surrounded by beautiful landscapes of soaring peaks, golden fields, and dark green leafy forests. The youngest Picard child, Pauline, was only 2 years old, and on April 6, 1922, she was playing outside in the yard with her siblings while her mother worked on getting supper ready and her father worked on the farm. At around 4:20 in the evening, Francois saw Pauline leave with her older sisters to check on the horses in the field, but when they returned a few hours later to have dinner, Pauline was not with them. The police were notified, but it was starting to get dark, and a storm was rolling in from the sea, so no efforts were able to be made that evening to locate little Pauline. However, at dawn the next morning, 150 people took to the surrounding fields and hills, calling her name, bringing along trained hunting dogs, hoping that one of them would pick up her scent. Although these searches continued for days, no sign of Pauline was found, and her parents eventually had to resign themselves to the fact that she was gone. But what had happened to her? Before we get into the details, I'd like to have a word from the sponsor of today's video, Bright Cellars. Bright Cellars is a monthly wine subscription club that uses a 7-question quiz to match you with wines based on your personal taste. They pride themselves on delivering wines you're guaranteed to like and also bringing you the education that goes along with those wines. If you guys have been here with me for a while, you know that wine is very close to my heart and a very big part of my Italian culture. I've been interested in figuring out what makes each wine different since I was legally old enough to drink, and Bright Cellars gives me the opportunity to try new and different wines I would never have thought to buy myself. Even better, they deliver them right to my door on my schedule. No need to leave the house and stand in front of shelves that are filled with hundreds and hundreds of different bottles of wine, trying to choose one or two that I'm interested in, bringing home and tasting. Bright Cellars sends me wines they know that I will love based on my specific tastes and preferences, and if you ask me, that is pretty great. My favorite part, honestly, is getting the box and opening it up to discover which wines I got that month. It's like a mystery box filled with wine. It's awesome. I'm always surprised, and I really love looking at the labels and trying to figure out what they're going to taste like. Bright Cellars also sends these little cards that I call Pokemon cards for adults because they tell you relevant information about your new wines, such as their flavor profiles and what temperature they're best to serve at, what foods they pair well with. It's like all the education and knowledge of going on a wine tour without ever actually having to go on a wine tour and talk to anyone. The cards also show the label of the bottle, so I think that they're really beautiful and interesting to look at, and they have a spot for you to rate the wine so you remember what you thought about that specific wine when you go to rate them later online at brightcellars.com at the end of the month to prepare for your next month's box, because Bright Cellars is going to tailor your next month's box based on what you thought of this box. I keep all these cards because I think they're so beautiful and they're full of really good information, and if I really like a certain wine, I have it at the tip of my fingers for when I send my husband to the liquor store. That's why I call them Pokemon cards for adults, and also because I like wine almost as much as I like Pokemon. As a side note, I am obsessed with this Cabernet that I received this month. It's called Meet Cute. The label is vintage 1920s film noir. The font is all great, Gatsby. The name of the wine is Meet Cute. I mean, come on. I don't even want to drink it. I just want it to exist in my wine rack forever. Cab and Pinot Noir are my favorite wines all day, but I'm also looking forward to trying this red blend from California. It's called Terra Forma, and apparently, according to the card, it's very ripe and fruit forward on the nose and palate with smooth tannins, full body, everything I love in a nice red wine on an autumn day. Lastly, I do want to elaborate on the convenience factor because this is very important to me. Not only is it convenient to have a box of wine brought to your front door, but it's also important to have a few extra bottles of wine on hand. You never know when there's going to be a housewarming party or a birthday party that you forgot about, or an unexpected guest who drops by. It's very important to me that I have a nice bottle of wine to offer as a gift or a refreshment when someone visits me at my home. Right now, Bright Cellars is offering viewers of this channel 50% off your first 6-bottle box. All you have to do is follow the link in the description box and take the quiz to get started. Thank you so much to Bright Cellars for sponsoring this video, and thank you, as always, to all of you who understand that sponsors are essential to this channel to keep it going so that I can continue bringing you content. Let's dive right in. So, an investigation was started to uncover who may have been responsible for the little girl vanishing, and the police already had a few people on their radar. There was an older man who the family knew, and his name was Monsieur Caramon. He was about 50 years old, he walked with a limp, and he had also been imprisoned for a violent crime, having been released only a few months prior to Pauline's disappearance. Now, he would often travel around to different farms in the area and take odd jobs for money, and it just so happened that the day before Pauline went missing, he had been working at the Picard farm. Witnesses claimed that Caramon seemed to have taken a liking to Pauline. He would often talk to her and bring her little candies and little gifts. But on April 7th, as hundreds of volunteers searched for this little missing girl, he was nowhere to be found. There was also a traveling umbrella salesman who had recently been seen in the area at the time of the disappearance, but he too could not be located. Now, the Picard family tried to get on with their lives, even in the absence of the bright little girl who was known to chat your ear off if you let her, and she always had a brilliant smile for everyone around her. On April 9th, the police tracked down this Monsieur Caramon a few towns over, but he had a solid alibi, as solid as it can get in the 1920s, I guess, and there's no cell phone data to actually show where you were at a certain time. He said that he'd been working on another farm 4 miles away from the Picard farm at the time of Pauline's disappearance, and apparently the owners of this farm verified this, so once again, the case was at a dead end. That was until a month later in early May. The police visited the Picard family and told them there had been some new information in regards to their missing daughter. It seemed that she may have been found wandering alone in the streets of Cherbourg and had been taken to a nearby convent for safekeeping. The police had a picture of this little girl, and from the photo, Francois and Marianne felt no doubt that this little lost wandering girl was their very own Pauline. There was a fleeting question of how she had managed to get to Cherbourg, which was in Normandy and almost 250 miles away from her home, but it was quickly pushed to the side as the Picards boarded the train that would take them to their daughter, who had been gone for a month. When they finally reached Cherbourg, the Picards had a strange reunion with their missing daughter. She would not say one word, and it seemed that she didn't even recognize her own parents. This child was thinner and smaller than Pauline had been, but that wasn't too out of the ordinary because she'd supposedly been on her own for a month and probably hadn't been eating enough or hadn't been fed properly. The police told the Picards that Pauline had not spoken a word to anyone since they found her, and she was also dressed in clothes that appeared to be in good condition, clean and well kept, but they were definitely not the same clothes Pauline had been wearing when she'd gone missing. Even the shoes this little girl was wearing stood out to the Picards since they were much nicer than any shoes Pauline herself had ever owned. It was also reported that although she would not speak any understandable words, she did make noises that nobody could decipher. The most strange thing of all, however, was she did not seem to understand or speak her native language of Breton. Breton is a Celtic language from the same family as Welsh and Cornish, brought to Armorica from Great Britain during the 5th and 6th centuries. You heard me right. I said Armorica, not America. Armorica was the name given in ancient times to the part of Gaul between the Seine and the Loire that includes the Brittany Peninsula of France. At first, it was the language of the upper class, but when they adopted French as their language, it became the language of the commoners who resided in the area of Lower Brittany. So this was the language that the Picard family spoke, the language that little Pauline would have grown up learning to speak, yet she seemed to not understand it at all. The Picards were torn, understandably. This little girl looked like Pauline. Both Francois and Marianne agreed. The ears were the same shape, the teeth were the same, and Francois said he would know his daughter's eyes anywhere. She had the same coloring in her skin and hair, the same mouth, the same smile. Yet their Pauline that they remembered had been a vivacious, talkative young girl. She'd been chatty, warm, and affectionate. But this new Pauline was virtually emotionless and would speak not a word to anyone. The Picards decided to stay the night and return to the convent the next morning to decide what they were going to do. Now, the next day, Pauline seemed in better spirits, at least towards her father. To her mother, she was still hesitant, still had her guard up, but Francois convinced his wife that this was in fact their daughter. Who knew the horrible things she'd experienced for the past month, being out on her own, so young and vulnerable? She was most likely in shock, and she would soon return to her normal self once they got her back home safely. Now, police officers from their own town had accompanied them on the train to Cherbourg, and they returned with the Picards and Pauline, and even these men recognized the little girl as Pauline Picard. On the train ride home, Pauline began to open up, and she was able to say 3 words in Breton, and those 3 words were yes, no, and father. On May 11th, the Picards and Pauline were back at home, and she had a joyous reunion with her siblings, all 8 of them, the family servants, and many of the members of their community who visited the Picards to see for themselves how the missing little girl had returned home after a month. Everyone recognized her. No one doubted that she was, in fact, Pauline. And she also seemed to recognize, people and things from her home. She was able to call the family pets by name, as well as one of the male servants who she had often played with before disappearing. There were some strange things that did stand out, though. She seemed very weak physically, and her legs would often shake, but every time she was picked up, she would arch her back and throw herself backwards, bringing her legs up behind her as if trying to make a complete circle with her body. The family doctor was brought in, who also recognized her as Pauline. This would have been the man who, delivered her, who was there at the house whenever she had a cold or a sniffle or measles, whatever. This was the man who had cared for her in all her doctorly needs since she was born, and he recognized her as Pauline. And he ended up determining that although she was a bit malnourished and weak, there was nothing else physically wrong with her, and she didn't appear to have been mistreated in her time away from home. Everyone chalked up her abnormal behavior to a mental or emotional shock. Not surprising, honestly, from someone so young who had gone through such a trying ordeal. The next day, on May 12th, the Picards were relieved to see that Pauline seemed to be doing better. She had been a little upset and almost depressed when she'd first arrived at home, but now she was crying less. She was playing with her brothers and sisters, and she had started to say a few more words in Breton, including the word bread. She was brought to the place where it was believed she had either gotten lost or been abducted, but here she did not cope so well. She began to scream in fear, and she began sobbing. She was clearly and visibly very upset. But even so, even though it was pretty clear for everyone to see she was upset, she was still not able to communicate what exactly had happened to her on that day over a month prior. So the neighbors, they'd all been showing up, for days since Pauline had come home bringing food, wanting to see that she was actually there, wanting to see if the rumors and the stories that had been flooding the town were true. And one of the neighbors who came to see for himself that Pauline had returned home was a man named Yves Martin. He arrived at the Picards the day after Pauline came home and asked, "Is it true? Is it really Pauline?" Pauline's mother, Marianne, smiled happily and assured him it was, in fact, true. And she called Pauline to come into the room and greet Monsieur Martin. As soon as he saw her, his face was drained of all its color, and he began laughing hysterically, and he was heard shouting out, "God is just. I am the culprit," before running out of the house. Now, the Picards didn't have much time to contemplate their neighbor's strange behavior. He'd always been an odd one since a head injury that he'd suffered a few years back, and Pauline was really starting to come out of her shell and feel more comfortable. So they kind of just wanted to focus on the positive and not worry about their kooky neighbor. They had thought that their daughter was lost to them forever, and now here she was, safe and sound. They had a lot to be thankful for, and that was what mattered. But then, just 2 weeks later, the Picards received another unexpected shock. A neighboring farmer who had been cycling by a field spotted what looked like clothes strewn about in the field a few feet off the road, kind of actually in the ditch on the side of the road. So he went over to investigate, and that was when he found the headless body of a child lying on the ground next to a neatly folded pile of clothes. So it seemed like there were some clothes that were kind of strewn about, kind of scattered around, but a few pieces of clothing had been folded and placed, so it seemed, next to the body of this child. The clothes, folded or otherwise, were dirty and covered in blood. So this man immediately left the scene and went home to call the police, who would not arrive until the next day. Once again, this is an isolated place, like out in the country. These are very small towns. Not a lot of people live there, not a huge population. So they kind of would have areas where the police were, but those police would have to travel to these more out-of-the-way areas if there was a crime committed or if they were needed. So it would take some time for them to get there. But once they did get there, once they did arrive, the investigation revealed that there was not only this small body in that field, but located just a few yards away, there was also a skull, crushed and cleaned of all flesh. On some nearby bushes, strands of golden blonde hair were found, trapped amongst the branches. Since there had only been one incident of a missing child in the area, the Picards were called to the scene. The body itself, being headless, could not be identified, but the Picards confirmed that the bloody clothes next to it belonged to their daughter, Pauline. But if this child in the field was Pauline, who was living in their home? A post-mortem exam was done by the local coroner in a barn by the light of a lantern, and it was discovered that there was a large tear on the side of this child's body under the last rib, and the groin also seemed to have been punctured by something sharp. Near the body on the ground, teeth had been found, as well as pieces of fabric and a fingernail. Despite all of this, the conclusion of the coroner was that this was the body of Pauline Picard, and she must have wandered off while she was with her sisters and gotten lost. She had then either died from exposure to the elements or starvation, and then her body had been ravaged by animals, most likely foxes. Now, there was a few problems with this conclusion. First of all, every single person who had been out searching for Pauline in the days after her disappearance swore up and down that they had searched that area, including that field, thoroughly, and there had been no body and no clothes there. The main police officer who arrived on the scene the morning after the body was found had actually helped in the search, and he too was positive that they had been over that same area and that nothing had been there. A local parishioner who had organized some search parties for Pauline gave a statement to the paper saying, quote, "We would have found a wallet if it was lost. We found nobody," end quote. Additionally, the area where the body was found was located less than a mile from the Picard home. Pauline was familiar with that area. She was young, but she often walked along this area with her siblings, and it was hard to believe She'd been unable to find her way home, or at least run into someone who could help her find her way home. And the body was located so close to the street, it was hard to believe that in the past month, all the people who had walked or biked by hadn't seen it. Additionally, if she had died from the cold or starvation, how had some of her clothes managed to end up in a neatly folded pile next to her body? Additionally, many of the soft tissue areas of the body had been left intact, and logically, these would have been the first areas that scavengers would have targeted. No one really bought the story that Pauline had died accidentally. Not even the local police, who had started another investigation into what could have possibly happened to her. And their first stop was to visit Yves Martin, the strange neighbor of the Picards who had come to see with his own eyes that Pauline had returned home and had left screaming and laughing maniacally about being the culprit. They finally did track him down to an insane asylum to which he had been admitted just days after this event, and apparently they were unable to get access to him there. And there was the little matter of the headless body found near a head, but the two did not belong to each other. The body was that of a little girl. The head was that of a full-grown man. Did that mean there was two people who had become victims of the same murderer? There were a lot of questions, and it seemed that the official stance of, the authorities, even though some police officers kind of struck out and did some investigating on their own, the official statement from authorities was, she wandered off, got lost, died of starvation, or died from the elements, and then the foxes just came and ate the body and, left so much of the soft tissue intact, and she'd been there the whole time, right? A month and a half. They claimed she had been there. Now, I don't believe this. There's no way. I read so many statements from people who had been searching for her, and they all said the same thing. We went over that area. We looked all over. We attacked that area with a fine-tooth comb. There was no body. There was no clothing. There was nothing. Plus, obviously, what kind of accident concludes with a little girl winding up dead from starvation or the elements, but she chooses to remove her clothes and fold them neatly next to herself before dying? I mean, I have a little girl myself. She's 3 years old, and I can't get her to fold her clothes for the life of me, much less if she was hungry or cold. I'm sure that wouldn't be the first thing on her mind to make sure that her clothes were folded neatly, but that's just my opinion. However, the body that was found in the field was buried under a headstone with Pauline Picard's name engraved on it, and her family attended her funeral, along with the little girl that they had thought was Pauline, but in reality, she couldn't possibly have been. This little girl had quickly developed a strong understanding of the Breton language. She was answering to the name Pauline, and she was actually beginning to act like the real Pauline, cheerful, active, talkative. She had especially become very close and attached to Francois Picard, Pauline's father, even though she had been slow to warm to Marianne, Pauline's mother. A local paper reported, quote, "As for the Picards, they still gaze bewilderedly at her, hour after hour, unable to convince themselves that she's not their own, and yet confronted with the ghastly evidence found in the ditch," end quote. Now, because their actual daughter had been found, dead unfortunately, the girl from Cherbourg was sent back to the convent. Some articles represent this decision as if the Picards had a choice, but in reality, they did not. If this little girl wasn't theirs, surely someone else out there was looking for her, and she needed to be there in Cherbourg when they came looking for her. Even in the old days, you couldn't just keep a kid that wasn't yours, and having to bring her back to the orphanage was really tough on the Picards, especially Francois, who had grown very fond of this little girl. It was reported by a newspaper in the United States that upon arriving back at the orphanage, the girl was speaking fluent Breton and was crying for her brothers and sisters back home by name, missing them and wanting to be back with them. This paper wrote, quote, "It is now suggested that the baby, who seemed destined to go through the world nameless and unowned, may be the real Picard child," end quote. Now, this little girl from Cherbourg was not nameless. Even though the Picards had to send her away, they did give her a name, Louise Marcelle Pauline. But unfortunately, she would never find her real family or her real identity because she died in that orphanage less than a year later after coming down with the measles. So this is a strange case, a strange story that leaves us with a lot of questions. But my number one question from the get-go is, how did the Picards make such a huge mistake? How did they mistake a complete stranger for their own daughter? And not just the Picard family, but their neighbors as well. The two girls must have resembled each other very much, a great deal, for so many people to have made such a big mistake. And if this seems crazy to us so many years later, imagine how the people in the community felt. When this all went down, it's no surprise that rumors and gossip spread afterwards, with everyone speculating about what had actually happened. Let's go over some of the theories. First and foremost in my mind is that neighbor, Yves Martin. There's no way that Pauline's death was just an unfortunate accident, at least in my opinion. The body was not found far from her home, and this was an area that had been well traveled and searched in the days and weeks after she went missing. So that can only lead us to one conclusion. The body wasn't there the whole time. Yves Martin had a reputation of not being all there. As I said, he had experienced head trauma and a slight personality change just a few years before the incident with Pauline, and everyone was kind of used to him being a bit of an oddball, but was he a murderer? What if Yves had seen Pauline lagging behind her older sisters as they walked, and he'd lured her away? He wasn't a stranger to her. She was young and trusting, and he could have done so quite easily without attracting the attention of her siblings or anyone else. What if he had then killed her and hid her body somewhere he felt it wouldn't be found? But a month later, he heard the news that Pauline had returned home, and he had to see for himself. When he arrived and saw the girl who resembled Pauline so much with his own eyes, he may have felt as if he was being haunted by the ghost of her, haunted because of his evil deeds, which is why he made the exclamation about God being just, as in, I committed this heinous act and now I'm being punished for it. Perhaps he felt that he would be tortured by this ghost for his crimes until he made it right. And the only way he could make it right at this point, once it was done, was for him to get her body and place it somewhere that she would be found. This way she could be returned to her parents and given a proper burial. But that head found with her, that head was clearly not Pauline's head. And you have to ask yourself, if Yves Martin was truly the culprit, how many bodies did he have just lying around in his hidden place where he left bodies? He got the right body, but didn't pick the right head? Did he just have so many bodies and heads laying around in whatever, like bunker that he's hiding them in that he just couldn't find the right one? It's certainly a mystery. And perhaps after he had staged the body, he took her clothes and folded them next to her, hoping this small act of respect would save his immortal soul. It's kind of like when women are sexually assaulted and killed. Their attacker will cover them with something, almost as a way to either hide their deeds or to be strangely respectful, not wanting to compromise the woman's modesty when she's found. So I don't think Pauline folded her own clothes. I definitely think somebody else did that. And why would somebody else do that other than they felt guilty, other than they hoped that this would redeem them in some way, in the eyes of God or possibly in the eyes of the townspeople if they later found out that he was the one who did it? But what about the strands of blonde hair found in the nearby bushes? Was it Pauline's hair or the hair of her attacker? With her head having never been found, we would have to assume that she'd possibly gotten caught in the branches and had her hair pulled out before she was taken, before she died. Did her attacker return her body to the same location that he had taken her from? And then Yves Martin went ahead and got himself committed to an insane asylum, either because, by the time he had taken the life of a child, seen the ghost of said child, and staged her body to be found, he was an actual raving lunatic, or because he knew law enforcement would soon be looking for him, and he didn't want to be accessible when they came calling. Either way, Yves Martin was never heard from again. There was also talk around town that the murderer could have possibly been Pauline's own father, Francois, who was known to have a violent temper. The Picards, friends and neighbors, whispered amongst themselves. Could Francois have killed little Pauline during one of his fits of rage and then maybe hidden her body so he could hide his crime? Maybe when the police showed up saying they'd found his daughter, he thought that passing off another girl as his daughter would help him escape punishment. He couldn't get thrown in jail for murdering someone who was clearly alive, after all. And if you remember correctly, Marianne had been unsure as to whether or not the little girl in the orphanage in Cherbourg was in fact Pauline, even though they resembled each other a great deal. It had been Francois who had been so sure and who had to convince his wife that this little girl was in fact Pauline. But then who put the real Pauline by the side of the road? It wouldn't have been Francois himself, since this would erase his no body, no crime defense. Did Marianne, his wife, know about what he had done? Did she find her daughter's body and place it there for all to see, hoping someone would accuse her husband and he would face justice? Another interesting theory was whispered by the townspeople. There was, nearby, a wealthy family who had accidentally murdered their young daughter, but they couldn't have this news get out for multiple reasons. The first being that it would ruin their sterling reputation, and the second being that if anyone found out their child was no longer alive, a big inheritance that was supposedly coming their way would be lost forever. So they paid the Picard family for Pauline so they could pass her off as their own daughter. Many people believe this is why the body was found without a head, because the body didn't belong to Pauline after all. It belonged to the daughter of the rich family. So they obviously couldn't leave her body with the head intact in that field, because everyone would know it was not Pauline, but this other girl. This could very well be a main reason why the head never surfaced, never was found. This would mean the Picards were in on the whole scheme. And remember, they did have 9 children. If this was true, Francois and Marianne most likely never had any intention of keeping the girl from the orphanage, because they'd gotten rid of one mouth to feed, and they certainly wouldn't be interested in taking on another. They were a hardworking rural family. They farmed for a living. They weren't rich by any means. The reason, especially back in the day, that a lot of these families would have so many children is so the children could work on the farm. But Pauline was 2, so I'm sure she was doing less working on the farm and more making messes, more getting in the way. Did her parents just want to get her out of the picture? Was she too much of a burden? Was she always trying to talk to them when they were trying to do their work? The older kids could help out, but she was, like I said, just another mouth to feed. So if they sold Pauline to this rich family, at least they knew that she would be taken care of. She was still alive out there somewhere, but they just didn't have to be responsible for her. And who was the girl from Cherbourg then? Despite what the article said, I don't believe that she could have been Pauline. She was described as being a city girl, meaning she wasn't as physically strong and large and hardy as the Picard children who had grown up in the fresh country air. Her clothing was in good condition, and she had really nice shoes. Someone had clearly cared for her at one time, but what had happened to them? Did they die? Did they leave her? Some believe she may have been the child of foreigners, maybe even Americans, and that's why she didn't speak Breton or really any language that anyone could understand at first. Maybe the noises she was making were just her trying to speak in a different language and she wasn't understood. Now, yes, it's true that it was reported she was speaking fluent Breton after just 1 month with the Picards, but we do have to remember that she was between 2 and 3 years old, the prime time for a child's brain to absorb and learn new things, especially languages. So it doesn't surprise me that with everyone around her speaking Breton, she would have picked up on it pretty quickly. And something that popped into my head, and I'm sure this is just me, but let me know in the comments if you had the same sort of thought. As soon as I heard this case, I thought about changelings. In Irish mythology, a changeling is a fairy left in the place of a stolen human child. Now, the fairies would steal human children for a couple different reasons. Maybe they needed a new little servant around the fairy house. Maybe the child's family or the human race in general had done something to displease the fairies, so they stole the child as retribution. Or maybe a fairy just genuinely wanted a baby all of his or her own to love. Whatever the motives behind the baby napping, the fairy left behind in the guise of a child would often become ill or start to look different. They would even at times be unable to move certain parts of their body, and this would be called fairy struck. And that reminds me of when Pauline would be picked up, all she would do is kind of twist her body and, try to pull her legs back and kind of stiffen herself. If a family suspected that their loved one had been replaced by a changeling, they had one of two choices: abandon it in the woods somewhere, hoping the fairies would come and collect it and bring their own child back, or they could raise the changeling as their own. Now, in 1895, Bridget Cleary, an Irish dressmaker, was murdered by her husband, Michael Cleary, after he suspected she'd been replaced by a changeling. It had all started on March 4th, 1895, when she'd taken a walk to deliver eggs to a local area that was suspected to be the home of a well-known fairy ring. So there's like stones and they form a circle, and people thought that those were fairy rings. Now, during her travels, she caught a chill. The next day, she couldn't even get out of bed. She was shivering and complaining about a constant headache. The local doctor diagnosed Bridget with bronchitis. But her husband, Michael, was not so sure. He confided in his friends that the woman living in his home wasn't his wife at all. She was far prettier than Bridget had been, and she was also 2 inches taller. So he believed that she'd been taken by the fairies as she traveled by this fairy ring, and he was sharing a bed with a changeling. One of Michael's friends was a man named Jack Dunn, who claimed to be clairvoyant, and also he was very knowledgeable on all things fairy. Jack told Michael that he needed to do something now or his real wife would never be returned to him. Michael procured some sort of herbal concoction that he's supposed to mix with fresh milk, and he forced this down Bridget's throat while his 3 male cousins held her down because she didn't want to drink this thing. As he was force-feeding her this alleged magical potion, he yelled, "Take it, you witch, or I'll kill you." After this ritual and a priest coming over to banish the evil spirits from Bridget, she seemed to improve, and 11 days later, she got out of bed. And, she was doing great, but then she asked for a glass of milk. So Michael became suspicious all over again, since his friend Jack had told him fairies loved fresh milk. They craved it, in fact, and they were always requesting it. Now, Bridget, who had been sick in bed for almost 2 weeks, who had been essentially tortured by her husband and his family members, she was over it, and she hit him with a yo mama joke, telling Michael that the only reason he was accusing her of messing with fairies was because his mother used to mess with the fairies. She used to go with the fairies, if you know what I mean. So this did not land well with Michael, and he threw her down on the ground, demanding that she eat 3 pieces of bread with jam, or he would know that she was a changeling. Because these changeling tests are kind of crazy. Like, you have to eat 3 pieces of bread with jam, or that means you're a changeling. Well, when she couldn't finish all 3 pieces, he tore her clothes off, slammed her head into the ground, and then set her undergarments on fire with a hot poker from the stove. As if that wasn't enough, this asshole dumped the oil from the lamp on top of her to, accelerate the flames. And with that, Bridget was gone. Now, there was actually a ton of people present when Michael did this, many of his own family members, but family members of Bridget's as well. They were all obviously shocked when he did this, and they begged him to stop and put the flames out, but he refused, saying, "She's not my wife. She's an old deceiver sent in place of my wife." Then he locked everyone in the house with Bridget's body for an hour, and when he returned, he threatened to kill them if they didn't help him bury her body and keep his secret. Now, Michael was eventually arrested along with many other people who had been there with him on the day of the murder, but they ended up not being charged with murder since the judge felt they had acted on genuine belief, meaning they actually believed Bridget was a changeling. So they couldn't really be blamed or held responsible for killing Bridget because they wouldn't have killed Bridget if they thought she was actually Bridget. That's a big assumption to make on the judge's part, but okay, 1800s, I see you. It's just like the judge said, what's your defense? And Michael was like, I thought she was a changeling. I thought she was an evil fairy changeling. And the judge was like, I get that. Yeah. You didn't think this was your wife. I can't really get mad at you for killing somebody that you thought was a fairy changeling. And then the judge just sent Michael off with a little pat on the butt saying, yeah, hope your next marriage goes better and the fairies don't replace your new wife with a changeling. So obviously, when I hear the story of Pauline Picard and the girl from Cherbourg, it does remind me a little bit of the changeling myth. A little girl goes missing. Another little girl who looks very much like the first little girl with just some slight differences is put in her place. Later, the body of the first little girl is discovered, and not long after, the second little girl falls ill and dies. Just some food for thought. I'm sure all the other theories are much more plausible. However, it is Harloween, so anything is possible. And now it's your turn to let me know what you think about this story. This was actually requested by several people. I had never heard about it until you guys requested it. So thank you. You guys are always opening my eyes and my mind to new things. I love that. Let me know what you think in the comment section. Do you think that the girl from Cherbourg was actually Pauline? Do you think the body in the field was actually Pauline? Do you think neither of these people or little girls was Pauline and Pauline is still out there or was still out there? Do you think that her own family knew more than they were saying? Do you think that the neighbor, Yves Martin, had anything to do with it? I definitely think, to me, that's the most plausible theory. I think Yves Martin killed Pauline, hid her body, and then just tried to make up for it when he saw this other girl. He probably thought that he was being cursed and haunted. That's just my opinion. And you might not think that today. If that happened today, you might not think that. But this was the 1920s. They were a lot more superstitious back then. I mean, obviously. So let me know what you think about all of this. Let me know what you think is the most possible theory. I feel bad for that little girl from Cherbourg. I feel so bad for her. That's what I take from the story, really. It makes me so sad that she was kind of lost. We don't know where she came from. We don't know what happened to her parents. We don't know how she ended up being there. But what we do know is when she went with the Picards, she seemed to be happy after some time. And she seemed to really love being in the country and having siblings and having pets and animals to play with. And she seemed to be really opening up, and she was learning the language and, even answering to Pauline's name as if she was kind of thinking, well, I know I'm not this girl, but I kind of like this life, so I'm just going to go along with it. And then she was just brought back to the orphanage, and then she died. And what a sad ending. And especially when that paper reported that she was crying for her siblings and, speaking Breton fluently and almost like she just wanted to go back. And that makes me sad. That's the saddest part about it. But let me know what you guys think. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much to Bright Sellers for sponsoring this video. Thank you so much to my patrons who are always there for me, who get to watch these videos early and let me know what they think before I post them. So it makes me feel a little better about posting them, because I always get nervous before I post a new video, especially during Harloween, because I really put my heart into these videos. And I want to thank you guys so much for being here and sharing this Halloween season with me. I can't wait for the rest of it. Don't forget to check the description box. There's a new Halloween merch in there, so check it out. Really cool shirt that says "Don't Hex Me." I love it. Check that out. Make sure you like the video if you liked it. Make sure you share it if you think it's worth sharing. And always make sure to let me know what you think in the comment section, because I'd love chatting with you guys in there. Stay kind, stay beautiful, stay spooky, and I will see you very, very soon.
Battle's going straight down, and that river runs deep, the mountains get steep, and the voices getting too loud. All these feelings I've buried, it's looking like a cemetery. They're coming back from the grave, calling out my name, better say a Hail Mary. Well, you don't know how deep it goes until it's getting you slowly. It's all you got to let it go.